Professor Boylan is the author of 15 books, perhaps most notably, She's Not There, A Life in Two Genders, which was the first book published by an openly trans American to become a bestseller. Professor Boylan is the inaugural Anna Quinlan Writer in residence at Barnard College of Columbia University. She's a novelist, memoirist, and short story writer, and she's nationally known as an advocate for civil rights. Her column, Men and Women, appears on the op-ed page of the New York Times on Wednesdays, which for me makes Wednesdays one of my favorite days of the week. Professor Boylan asked, again, that I not make a big fuss, but I just want to say one personal note. I read, and I actually brought my 15-year-old copy, I read She's Not There 15 years ago, and it left a permanent imprint on my heart. As a gay man, I could relate to the narrative of disconnecting from parts of myself due to secret shame and constant fear of rejection. I could relate to her retelling of conversations with those around her as she transitioned. When someone, for instance, remarked to her, "Gay and lesbian people don't necessarily have that much in common with transsexuals." "Yes," she said in response, "except for the fact that we get beaten up by the same people." Throughout her writing, and I implore you to read her books. We're going to have a book signing immediately following her keynote. And I'm a big fan of everything that she's read, including I'm Looking Through You, Growing Up Haunted. And now, as a gay dad, her book, Stuck in the Middle with You, a memoir of parenting in three genders, really resonates with me. But throughout her writing, Professor Boylan is candid and funny, melancholic and inspiring. And so without more fuss, I'll simply leave you with my favorite line from She's Not There. "We all have dragons to slay in life. This one is mine. I hope that doing so will provide a model to others on how to find the bravery to be true to oneself, even if it means doing something that seems impossible." So please join me in welcoming Professor Jennifer Finney Boylan.
What a delight to speak to a room full of teachers, my people. How are you doing? I know this is a wonderful conference, and I'm grateful to everyone, especially Gregory, but for everyone who invited me and made this possible. But I'm also grateful to you. They say that teaching sometimes is a thankless occupation, but it's not thankless because I'm thanking you right now. And also in the spirit of, as a composition teacher, one of the things we do is learn how to acknowledge plagiarism. So this is actually not mine. This is a tweet, pardon the expression, that I saw this morning in the wake of the horrible events of the last week and the horrible suggestions coming from the White House in response to the horrible events of this week. And the tweeter said, "Yes, arm teachers, that's a great idea. I'm a teacher. I want you to arm me. I want you to arm me with the money to hire enough teachers to teach our students. I want you to arm me with the resources to have small classes so that I can get to know all of my students. I want you to arm me with all the resources and support that I need." And that is the way you arm teachers, and that's the way you save lives. So pretty good, right? Okay, it's not mine, but yeah. When I came out as trans, everyone said to me, "Well, are you going to become an activist now?" And my sense of an activist was somebody who would chain themselves to a fence. And it seemed a little off-brand to me somehow. And yet, I don't know if I've chained myself to a fence. I've certainly carried enough signs and shouted enough things over the last 15 years. Excuse me. But a thing that I've also learned over this last decade and a half or 2 decades is that there are all kinds of ways of being an activist. There are all kinds of ways of changing the world. And teaching is certainly one of them. And storytelling is another. So by your leave and with your blessing, what I will do by way of keynote this morning is share with you 4 stories. 4 stories that will address resistance, gender, and the main one, the third one that I'm going to read is about teaching the relationship between teachers, students, writers, and their teachers, their shepherds, their mentors and mentees, and gender. And so that's my intention, and I hope it's helpful. I don't know if it will quite count as one more way of arming you, but I know that and hope that throughout this whole conference you'll find what you need in order to make the huge difference that you make in the lives of young people, including my children. So the first thing I want to read you is this is actually a scene from She's Not There. It's a really short piece. But I thought I'd begin with this. And we're just waiting for my little device here to power up. Ah, there it is, look. So, okay. It is okay. I'm happier out here where I can see you. There, I don't know, I feel like, I don't know, there's something about everyone like that. And also, kind of looking at this giant, like, picture of me, like, 10 years ago. It's a little, a little discouraging. So if you want, look up there and imagine that I look like that. All right, so this is a short excerpt from She's Not There, and this chapter was called Hurricane Ethel. I was born in 1958 on June 22nd, the second day of summer. It was also the birthday of Meryl Streep and Chris Christopherson, both of whom I later resembled, although not at the same time. One day, when I was about 3, I was sitting in a pool of sunlight cast onto the wooden floor beneath my mother's ironing board. She was watching Art Linkletter's house party on TV. I saw her ironing my father's white shirt, a sprinkle of water from her blue plastic bottle, a short spurt of steam as it sizzled beneath the iron. Someday, you'll wear shirts like this, said Mom. I just listened to her strange words as if they were a language other than English. I didn't understand what she was getting at. She never wore shirts like that. Why would I ever be wearing shirts like my father's? Since then, the awareness that I was in the wrong body, living the wrong life, was never out of my conscious mind, never, although my understanding of what it meant to be a boy or a girl was something that changed over time. Still, this conviction was present during my piano lessons with Mr. Hockenberry, his actual name. And it was there when my father and I shot off model rockets. It was there years later when I took the SAT. It was there in the middle of the night when I woke at my dormitory at Wesleyan. And every night as I lived my life, I encountered this awareness with an exasperated companion thought, namely, don't be an idiot. You're not a girl. Get over it. But I never got over it. The first time I remember trying to come up with some sort of solution to the being alive problem was about 1968 when I was staying in a summer house in Surf City, New Jersey. A hurricane was approaching. My parents were away watching my sister ride horses, and I was being tended by my dipsomaniac grandmother, Gammy, and her friend Hilda Watson, a tiny woman from North Yorkshire who was as deaf as a blacksmith's anvil. Since it was nearly impossible for Hilda to hear even the loudest sounds, a lot of the time she sat in a chair wearing a startled expression. And when she was aware that she was being spoken to, she made a soft whooping noise similar to the squeals of a guinea pig. Like this. Whoop, whoop, whoop. My eccentric Aunt Nora was there too, who liked to make sock puppets as a gesture of love. One time she made me, out of one of my father's black socks, an octopus with a mustache and a red top hat. On the day the hurricane hit, I'd taken a walk underneath the boardwalk. It was as close to infinity as I could imagine under there, the row of pylons and boardwalk stretching as far as I could see. All around me were the echoes of the ocean and the howling wind and the seagulls and the rain, the smells of creosote and tar. I was taking a big walk. On this big walk, I was going to try to solve whatever it was that was wrong with me. I walked down the dark tunnel of the place beneath the boardwalk, trying to figure out what was the deal with being alive. I knew I wasn't a girl. By then it was clear enough that girls and I were different. But just as clearly, I wasn't a boy either. What was I? What was going to happen to me if I didn't stop wanting to be a girl all the time? I got as far as a fishing pier, and I left the place below the boardwalk and climbed out on the jetty. Waves were already crashing angrily against the rocks, and rain was starting to fall. The wind whipped my hair around. I sat out on that rock and looked out at the sea and watched the ocean for a long time. And then I thought, maybe you could be cured by love. Well, even then, I think I was aware of how corny this sounded. But still, I believed it to be true. If I were loved deeply enough by others, perhaps I would be content to stay a boy. I walked back to the apartment with this newfound awareness surrounding me like a call. I would start with my grandmother. Did I just mess my hair up completely doing that? Am I okay? Am I good? Okay. I don't know. Because if I'm going to look funny for the next hour, you should tell me now. We good? All right. Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you. Whew. Oh, I could go now. That was all I wanted, really. If you can't be loved enough, look good. Where were we? Oh, yes. Content to stay a boy. I walked back to the apartment with this newfound awareness surrounding me like a call. I would start with my grandmother. I opened the door to find Gammy and Mrs. Watson playing gin and drinking vodka. Gammy was describing the night of my father's conception. "Best screwing I ever had," she said. She looked at me. "What's with you?" "Nothing," I said. Mrs. Watson was listening to the Zombies on the AM radio. "Well, it's too late to say you're sorry. Why should I know? What do I care? Please don't try to find her. She's not there." It was odd that Mrs. Watson or any of these women would be listening to the Zombies, as they were all classical music fans. "Why is Hilda listening to WFIL?" I asked, curiously. "Shh," said my grandmother. "She thinks it's classical." So what we're going to do now is we're going to leave my grandmother and Mrs. Watson and my Aunt Nora there for about a half an hour, and we're going to come back to them in just a little bit. And now Act 2. It's like This American Life, Act 2. Although I don't have an Ira Glass imitation. It's never come up in conversation before. But now I realize it's the thing that I'm missing. I want to share with you a piece that's somewhat more irate. I wrote this in a flurry just about a year ago, last year, when in the same week, both the Times of London and the New York Times featured thoughtful pieces about transgender women. And I wrote it a year ago, but in fact, this topic springs eternal, because would you believe, this very week, in fact, two things happened. One, there's publication of a new book called When Harry Became Sally, and it's a right-wing, what do we call them? I believe provocateur. Is that the generous term? Has written this whole book about people like me and why we're this huge threat and why we're all insane, and what we really deserve is hatred and ostracism, because that is really what our society is really crying out for right now. And so there's that. And also this book, he appears to have written this book without actually talking to any transgender people. So, it's really the voice of authority. Also, this same week, I don't know if you saw, there in the Kansas State House, I'm trying to remember which party. Oh, I think it's the Republicans, have proposed that any validation of transgender identity be against the law in Kansas. And that casts a rather wide net, doesn't it? So, like I said, this topic appears not to be exhausted yet. In referring to the pieces last year, I was thinking that those lovely essays were written by people who are, strangely, not trans, but who were kind enough to share with them their theories about why people like me really deserve to have their womanhood and their humanity held up for scrutiny and debate. Because, that's what everybody really wants, is to have the fact of their humanity be the topic of a series of clever thought pieces, and pros and cons. That same week, that guy Milo appeared on the Bill Maher show, and the two of them managed to bridge their many differences by agreeing that people like me deserve at least a little bit of ridicule. In the wake of all that, I was asked to respond to those essays, to write something along the lines of why I actually am human after all, if you kind of take a sec to think about it. But what can I tell you? I was somehow not in the mood. So instead I wrote this short piece, which I call I'm All Done. And it goes like this. Okay, another week, another clever think piece by someone who feels it does the world a real service to explain why transgender people aren't who they say they are, or aren't entitled to the same fundamental kindness and decency you'd accord any other soul, or who have yet another brand new crazy-ass theory about why their own fears and ignorance about us really can be forgiven. This week sees a major essay in a major publication by a woman who has it out for me and people like me. A hugely popular TV comedian's talk show features a guest by someone who allows us how what precious endangered trans children actually deserve is scorn and laughter. I used to respond to these screeds patiently, one by one, countering their arguments, explaining with Trans 101 living color exactly how much more complex gender is than they might have at first expected. I used to parse the differences between, this is in quotes, transsexual people and genderqueer people and drag queens and kings and cross-dressers and gender non-conforming persons of every stripe. I figured maybe it would be helpful for people to understand the wide diversity of our community, to understand that the many different ways there are of being trans are one of our strengths. And I still do believe that it's helpful sometimes for people to know about the many different ways there are of being us. That really can help sometimes. But I'm so over defending my own humanity. I'm so over providing a PowerPoint presentation about the fact that I exist. And I'm completely done with engaging with anyone who has a clever theory explaining why they actually understand my soul better than I do. To be blunt, if your crazy-ass theory of the world doesn't ease the suffering of people whom you do not understand, maybe what you actually need is a new theory. I'm going to continue all the work I've been doing these last 15 years, talking about identity and story and love. I'm going to try to support other people in the community whose work I admire or find challenging or engaging. But in creative writing, we have a saying, of course, show, don't tell. And in writing, that means that a scene with dialogue and texture and character is much more convincing than narration, explaining, and lecturing. And it strikes me that this may be true of our movement now as well. It may be that all the explaining we do of our own lives, all of our impassioned speeches about what it means to be trans, what it means to be this particularly complicated and gifted form of human, are less effective than simply being, than simply living in the world and having people understand that we're here, that we're not going away, and that we deserve the same as everyone else, equal protection under the law, as well as, who knows, maybe even a little human kindness. So the next time another one of these clever screeds appears in print, and someone asks me to provide the counterpoint, I'll gently stand down. You want to know how I'll refute them? Look at me. I refute them by living. I refute them by celebrating this life. I refute them every day by getting up and stepping out into the world, and by refusing to be defined by anyone or anything other than my own heart. All together now. I was warned. I was given an explanation. Nevertheless, I'm sorry, what was that? Nevertheless. She persisted. Oh, one more time. Nevertheless. She persisted. The hell yes. Sorry, I'm all verklempt. Okay, so here's the main thing I wanted to share with you, if I may. Although this is going to take a little bit of forethought. Okay, so I want to talk about teaching and gender and resistance and writing and students and all of that. But in order to do that, well, actually, by way of doing that, I'm going to also talk about one of the teachers who made the biggest difference in my life, and it was a writer whom, when he was my teacher, was one of the most well-known writers in the country, and who is now, his star has fallen and people don't read him so much anymore, Mr. John Barth, who for years ran the MFA program at Johns Hopkins University. Well, anyway, great teacher. And but one of the things that Jack taught me was his definition of plot, and this definition figures at the center of the thing I'm going to read, and it's very complicated, as many of Jack's utterances are. So I thought I was just going to gloss a little bit for you now, so that when we get to it, it doesn't just sound like gobbledygoo to you. So ready? Plot is what? What is plot? Well, plot is the incremental perturbation of an unstable homeostatic system and its catastrophic restoration to a new and complexified equilibrium. Thank you very much. Now, what the hell was that? Well, here's the deal. When you in storytelling, what's the word? Shall we say pedagogy? Sorry. Think of your life as a set of relationships with other people, and also your relationship with yourself as well, I suppose. But most of us, excepting, of course, the president, have relationships with other people that define who we are and how we go about our existence in the world. And most of the time, things are more or less balanced. I mean, not perfectly balanced, but kind of an unsteady, like you're on a surfboard, or like, did you see the guys doing the big air last night in the Olympics, the snowboarding things? Well, anyway, so it's a sense of balance, but it's not a perfect balance. It's a very uneasy balance. So if you think about your relationships with other people, the important ones, most of the time, that is to say, when no story is taking place, things are mostly cool. But then, at the end of Act 1, something happens. Something dramatic happens. And you lose your balance. And your universe comes out of whack. Now a story has begun. So what sorts of things go, what's an example of something going out of balance? Well, let's see. Turns out this little ring, Bilbo's ring, no big deal. Turns out it's the one ring. He is bending his will. Osh, nosh, gosh, osh, nosh. Okay, so there's that. Or a guy knocks on your door and says, Harry, you don't know who you are. You're a wizard, Harry. Or you're a reindeer, and suddenly, I would even say it glows. So now your life has changed, and you can think of all of your favorite myths and stories and movies. What's the moment of no return? So that's the moment that your hero loses their balance in life. And in the rest of the story, Acts 2 and 3, you set about trying to restore the balance. So if the thing that threw things out of whack was suddenly a tornado picked up your house, excuse me, a twista picked up your house and put it down in this magical kingdom, what do you want to do? You want to get back home. In a good story, though, you don't just restore things back the way they were. You restore them to a new place so that at the end of the good story, things have now been rearranged so that there's now balance in the world again, but it's a different balance. It's a complexified balance. It's a new and complexified balance. So Barth's definition of plot, the gradual perturbation, so something that's disturbed very slowly. And what is that thing? An unstable homeostatic system, a set of relationships involving human beings. So that is disturbed. That's Act 1. And, this is Acts 2 and 3, it's catastrophic restoration. Catastrophic not in the sense of the Hindenburg crashing, but catastrophic in the sense of something big and world-changing. Restoration, and what is it restored to? A new and complexified equilibrium. And that movement from balance, change, to finding a new balance is the thing that is usually at the heart of most great stories, and it's also at the heart of our lives, I think, as we experience change and crisis and conflict. So, wasn't I going to read you a story at one point? Here's the story about teachers and their students, which I call the catastrophic restoration. You ready? I arrived at the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins in September 1985, bearing a box of books, a K-Pro word processor. Oh, a few giggles from some of the members of what do we say? Teachers of a certain age. Is that the phrase? A K-Pro word processor and a long blonde wig I kept hidden in a box in the closet. I wasn't out as transgender in those days, not by a long shot. But I did have the tools I needed to slip out of the house once in a while and prowl around Baltimore en femme. Then I'd head back to the house and wash off the makeup and get ready for the graduate workshop taught by the writer John Barth. We'd been told upon our arrival to call him Jack, but I couldn't imagine doing this any more than I might imagine calling Jorge Luis Borges Louis. The high watermark of maximalism in American literature had come and gone by the fall of 1985. By then, my peers mostly dreamed of being Raymond Carver, maybe, or Ann Beattie, perhaps. Still, Barth remained right up there with Borges, Pynchon, or Calvino, postmodern authors whose work combined parody, self-consciousness, and a sense that a novel might be, among other things, a comment upon itself. In one class, Jack unveiled his theory of plot. It's the gradual perturbation of an unstable homeostatic system and its catastrophic restoration to a new and complexified equilibrium. He liked drawing a parallel between the structure of dramatic action and that of other things, a love affair, not least. I can see his big round head even now, smiling wickedly at me, saying, "There's a reason they call it climax, Boylan." In those days, I lived a double life, female out of the classroom, male when I was on campus. There was a girl I'll call Scarlett who had a very dissatisfying relationship with me because I was always slipping away from her as I was slipping away from everyone in those days. The result of my inability to share with the people my inability to share the complicated and heartbreaking facts of gender dysphoria with those that I loved. I had a fight with her one afternoon, and that night, as I walked around Baltimore, en femme, I was like saying that like Pepe Le Pew, en femme. I pulled into a bar that I occasionally frequented, the Club Charles. With my long hair, I was either a hiccup or someone's been to the Club Charles, yeah? That's still there, isn't it? Okay, we'll talk. With my long hair and small bones, I passed very well in those days. Most people didn't detect my twin identities at first. I sat at the bar, drinking a glass of wine, enjoying the evening until I saw Scarlett in the corner. Her hair, her red hair, was piled high on top of her head, and from her mascara, it seemed to me as if she'd been crying. Later, I went into the ladies' room, sat down in a stall. Moments later, I saw feet appear in the stall next to mine. I recognized those shoes. I heard the sound of snuffling, and I said in a voice that she didn't recognize, "Are you okay?" She replied through her tears, "Oh, I'm okay. It's just some guy." Then she asked me to pass her some paper. I pulled a few sheets from the roll on my side and then passed them beneath the divider. For a moment, our fingers touched. And then they weren't touching anymore. It was a complexified equilibrium, all right. In the workshop, I was working on a piece called The Invisible Woman, a story that was meant to be Barthian in its comic self-referentiality, but which, in the end, turned out to be Boylan-esque, a tale of a woman who had to keep herself hidden lest the unforgiving world discover her identity. It would take me years to understand the obvious, that I wasn't writing a novel, but a memoir, and that the woman in hiding that I was describing was, of course, myself. It wasn't a very good novel, but Barth shepherded me through it anyway, using his abundant gifts of erudition and love. I learned a lot about writing from him, to be sure, but even more, I learned about revision. Given that survival in the world is so often about learning how to successfully rewrite ourselves, it may be that in the end, Barth taught me less about creating fiction than in how to invent myself. It was a skill that, in years to come, would quite literally save my life. On the 40th anniversary of the founding of Hopkins's writing seminars, the university staged a formal reading by the program's professors. That was the first time I heard him read a story entitled Night Sea Journey, a tale narrated by a sperm, of all things. Of course, the voice of a sperm was probably the last narrator in the universe that I was concerned with, given the nighttime journey that I was undertaking in the streets of Baltimore. But still, there was plenty in that narrative that spoke to me, and not least the part that goes, quote, okay, so this is the sperm talking now. I've begun to believe not only that she exists, but that she lies not far ahead and stills the sea and draws me her word. Aghast, I recollect the maddest notion that our destination, which exists, mind you, in but one night sea out of hundreds and thousands, was no shore as commonly conceived, but a mysterious being, indescribable except by paradox and vaguest figure, wholly different from us swimmers, yet our complement, the death of us, yet our salvation and resurrection, simultaneously our journey's end, midpoint, and commencement, not membered and thrashing like us, but a motionless or hugely gliding sphere of unimaginable dimension, self-contained, yet dependent absolutely in some wise upon the chance, always monstrously improbable, that one of us will survive the night sea journey and reach her. Well, I did reach her in the end, if by her I may refer to my own female self, the woman I finally embraced and unveiled just shy of my 40th birthday, a woman who was welcomed with almost inconceivable grace by my colleagues and my family. Somehow I found the very thing the narrator of Night Sea Journey tries to forswear at its conclusion, the unrefusable summons of what he calls love, love, love. I've often been asked how it was I found the courage to make that transition. I can only say that above all else, the most important way I found of making sense of my life was by seeing it as a story, by finding the thread of narrative that brought sense and reason to what otherwise felt like chaos. When I was young, I'd found my life perturbed incrementally by the implausible truth of my embodiment. Finally, at its dramatic climax, I arrived at the miracle of its catastrophic restoration and a new and complexified equilibrium. Embracing my identity, I came to understand, was less about gender and more about genre, that the life I was living needed to be truth, not fiction, and that in order to live that truth, I needed to get on with the daunting project of creating my own next draft. By then, Baltimore was more than a decade and a half in the rearview mirror. Still, I'd carried John Barth within me in the classrooms of Colby College, where I used to teach, and I thought about him frequently as I tried to respond to my own students' work with the love and grace he had once modeled for me. I've graduated authors of my own now, a whole generation of them, and some of these, in turn, have themselves gone on to become teachers. These students, thousands of them now across the country in classes taught by the hundreds of writers and professors trained by Barth, these are Jack's grand students, and he, their grand teacher. And I hope all of you have had the experience as teachers. Some of you may not, because maybe you're very new to the profession, but I hope you've had the experience of a former student of yours coming to you and you say, how have you been, what are you doing? And they say, I'm a teacher. It really is like a torch being passed from the person who taught you, to your teacher, to your student, and from there to their students. I mean, it's really like it's the most beautiful unbroken chain, going from us all the way back to, I don't know, Socrates. I mean, if you go back far enough, who was the first teacher? Who taught the people who taught us? I don't know. Anyway, it's one of my favorite things about being a teacher, is that moment, knowing that it doesn't end with me, and that, after I'm gone, I hope some of the insights I may have brought my students are now being brought to other students because my students are now teachers, and so on. I wasn't sure how Jack was going to react to the news of my transformation. While I thought of him, or at least his characters, as sexually adventurous, transgender issues in those days were still seen as exotic and inscrutable, even by the liberal and open-hearted. At last, one day, I got a lovely little email in response to my memoir, which is entitled, She's Not There. He wrote, I should say she is very much there, Boylan, or should I say, girl land. You see what he did there? That little pun on my own name, and its loving acknowledgement that I had indeed moved from boy land to girl land, was Barthian to the core. A few years after that, Colby College, where I was then a member of the faculty, gave Jack an honorary degree. And there we were. After all these years, together again, teacher and student, writer and writer. At a celebratory dinner the night before commencement, Jack addressed the faculty, and part of his address concerned, guess what? Thinking of our lives as stories, the very process that had saved me, both in and out of the classroom, half a lifetime before. Reviewing his definition of plot, he said, what it is, Boylan, repeat after me, is the gradual perturbation of an unstable homeostatic system and its catastrophic restoration to a new and complexified equilibrium. And I said it word for word along with Barth. I closed my eyes, and for a short, strange moment, there I was, a student again, still young. All the triumph and turmoil of my life still far ahead. He returned to the table from the podium and embraced me. Nicely done, Jack, I said. He replied, nicely done yourself, girl land. And I should have just let him go, let him return to his chair. But instead, I held him in my arms just a little bit longer. That great, kind genius of American literature, my teacher. And I thought, well, what else would you think? Love love, love. Thank you. Oh my God. Sorry. Sorry, I'm getting all emotional just remembering all that homework. Okay, I'm good. All right, you teachers, this is the last one. This piece was in the Times, I think, last summer. And so some of it refers to things that are no longer current, but I haven't edited it, so you'll just travel in time with me. One thing you may not know, when you write a column for the Times, they always come up with a title. Like whatever you called it, they're going to call it something else. So I think my original title was Prick Up Your Ears. They called it, Let's Bring Back Moral Imagination. You can see why that would get more clicks than Prick Up Your Ears. Although I think when I first wrote it, I called it Lend Me Your Ears. Anyway. Okay, so cast your mind back. Where were we about a half an hour ago? I came back from the beach to find my grandmother and her nearly deaf friend, Hilda Watson, playing gin and drinking vodka. She's Not There by the Zombies was playing on the radio. Well, it's too late to say you're sorry. Why should I? And so on and so on. This was a little strange since they were all classical music fans. Why is Hilda listening to WFIL? I asked. Shh, said my grandmother. She thinks it's classical. I've told that story lots of times since it happened, and back in 1968, sometimes it gets a laugh. And sometimes I use my grandmother's line, shush, she thinks it's classical, as a clever metaphor for the way our perceptions can be mistaken about the world around us, about what we think we perceive, even our sense of self. But lately, it doesn't seem quite so clever to me. In late May, I was searing a steak in my New York City apartment, and right on schedule, the place filled with smoke, and the fire alarm went off. I went out into the hallway and stood on a chair to turn it off, and I had to do this about a half a dozen times before the thing stayed off. Excuse me. And each time I had to climb up on a chair so that my ears, already damaged from a lifetime of playing in rock and roll bands, were less than 2 feet from the piercing alarm affixed to the ceiling. When the alarm finally stopped, my hearing was damaged, or traumatized, as the otolaryngologist later described it. A high-pitched ringing began that night that has not ceased, a sound somewhere between the howling of wind and a chorus of several hundred crickets. The rest of my hearing is a mess, too. I've lost about 60% of the upper register of the sound spectrum, and the overall tenor of what I do hear resembles the buzzing from a blown-out speaker. I have now been fitted with hearing aids. I'm learning to read lips. Why, yes, it does suck. Thank you for asking. But back when my grandmother's friend Hilda was the one who was deaf, I viewed her condition as a source of comedy, a handicap that struck me as more the stuff of metaphor than an occasion for compassion. It wasn't that I didn't understand that she suffered back when she was old and deaf and I was young and not. It's that whatever she suffered from was something that I didn't need to be concerned with because her problems weren't mine. And as they said in Ireland, I was young and the world was wide. It didn't occur to me then that imagining the humanity of people other than myself was even remotely my responsibility. And yet, the root cause of much of the world's trouble stems from our lack of interest in imagining what the experience of being human is like for people who are not ourselves. The philosopher Edmund Burke, I'm sorry, I just dozed off for a second. Oh, sorry. The philosopher Edmund Burke called this the moral imagination, the idea that our sense of ethics should transcend our own personal experience and embrace the dignity of the human race. A lack of moral imagination is the inability to do the thing that Atticus Finch commands Scout to do, to stand in another man's heels and walk around in them. Shoes, sorry. Ha, ha, ha. A few weeks ago, I appeared on the MSNBC show Hardball with a representative from something called the Family Research Council, a group whose very title suggests an inability to imagine any kind of family other than those of its own members. The FRC spokesperson was asked by host Chris Matthews what bathroom I, a transgender woman, should use. Even though I pass, that's in quotes, as a woman and have female anatomy and ID, North Carolina law holds that I should use the men's room, since my birth certificate still says M. My adversary was clearly uncomfortable with the idea of a woman like me in the men's room with him. At the same time, he did not want to budge from his talking point that people like me shouldn't be allowed in the women's room either, because my existence, of course, constitutes some sort of hallucinatory threat to the women folk. In the end, he didn't have an answer for the question, what restroom should Boylan use? Because the idea that I am human and do sometimes use a restroom was really not one that had ever given him much concern. My sense is that the imbroglio in North Carolina and elsewhere is not really about bathrooms. It's about the fact that plenty of people just don't like the idea that there are transgender people in the first place, and that they cannot imagine our lives. They think that people who are trans, or in fact different in any way, have somehow come up with the entirety of our existence primarily in order to hurt other people's feelings. And yet, time and time again, I've seen people open their hearts on a range of issues when some otherized soul is revealed to be a member of their own family or a friend. And of course I'm glad for the progress that the culture is making as a result of more people being known in this way. But too many people who fall outside the bright lines of the culture are met with hatred and ostracism because whoever and whatever they are is something others have never been compelled to imagine. We don't go to heaven because we hate people who are easy to hate. We go to heaven because we love people who are difficult to love. And who is more difficult to love than someone whose experience of the world is radically different from our own? In American Sign Language, the sign for transgender used to be the sign for sex, a curved finger drawn down across the cheek, then rotated 180 degrees to suggest a reversal of sex. In more recent years, however, a new sign has been created. The fingers of the hand facing downward over the heart like a closed flower, then rotating upward with opening petals until the fingers are then placed back over the heart with the flower facing in the right direction. We may as well all do that. So, fingers down like this, like you're, a bird going down but you like this, okay? Put it over your left breast or chest or whatever you have. Now look, it's coming out and it's coming out. Now it's going to face the ceiling. As it faces the ceiling, look, your fingers are coming out. Look, the flowers are open. The petals are open. Lovely. And now it's going to go back in your heart facing this way, and the petals are going to slowly close like that. Look back in your heart. How nice. Let's do that one more time. Ready? A little faster. Ready? And it comes, petals are open. No, it's going back in your heart like that. Very good. Okay, ready? One more time. Ready? 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 I can't understand you. You're speaking too quickly. And it's worth saying, actually, to me, the difference between this and this shows the difference between, well, for one thing, it shows the difference between where we were in 2003 when I wrote She's Not There and where we are now. She's Not There is a book I'm very proud of, but it was updated 5 years ago. But it still reflects a moment in the discourse around transgender people that is now, well, things have changed. I don't want to say it's the far past, because there's still many people who've never once had a conversation that they know of with a transgender person. So, I think it's a good book in that way. But the discourse has changed so much. But we've moved from, it was sex backwards, to, yeah, that was my Frankenstein voice, to something else like this. And to me, it's a much more universal thing in that, well, I don't know. I mean, is there anybody in this room who does not now or who has not at some point in the past had something in your heart that you couldn't bring out into the light? Either something that you finally brought out or something that still is a secret, something that's still in the dark. And you know, this is what we do in life with any luck. And what is luck? Luck, in some ways, what's the definition of luck? One of the definitions is having a good teacher who can teach you that you bring that flower out and the petals will open. Let it into the sunshine. Don't keep it locked. So, you know, this is the journey that we all take in life in some ways, right? We have a you know, a gradual perturbation of something that's in our heart, and then it comes out, and now there's a new equilibrium because now you're living with the thing that was in the dark. You're now living your life with that thing out in the light. So I just love sharing that because it's a very, the difference between that and this is very, I don't know, it's moving and shows, it's kind of a visual way of actually seeing a change in the culture. Where was I? Oh yeah, a flower facing in the right direction. So this is a sign. I didn't used to know this. ASL. Because I didn't have to. I know it now. Of course, sometimes the difference is as much a challenge for our loved ones as for ourselves. After I left the otolaryngologist's office that morning with my diagnosis, I called my wife on the phone. My wife, who I call Grace she's not there, but whose real name is Dee Dee. My wife, to whom this year I will have been married 30 years, 12 as husband and wife, 18 as wife and wife, which is pretty cool. Yeah, that's for my wife. A woman who you might say is a very patient woman indeed. But who also opened her heart to me and to herself as well. I called my wife on the phone. Mid-call, my throat closed up and I began to weep right there on Fifth Avenue. So I was one of those people you pass on the street who were like by themselves crying. I'm sorry you have to be married to someone like me, I sobbed. Jenny, she said, I stayed with you through the gender thing. You really think I'd leave you because you have hearing aids? It was a beautiful morning in New York City. I was surrounded by honking taxi cabs, chirping birds, little kids shouting. I said to her, "What?" Thank you.
Your writing is so inspiring and so beautiful, and it really goes straight to the heart. And I love the love, love, love. So thank you for all that.
I'm just replaying all that in my head right now. Thank you.
And sometimes I feel like, in a naive way, that if we can just learn to listen and love to each other, that, you know, just listen to each other and understand that we walk through the world in such different ways. And I will never be able to see somebody else's story unless they tell me, and they will never be able to see mine unless they tell me, and the beauty is in that communication. And, you know, I think we see the troubles all around us, and I'm wondering if you have some words of inspiration for sustainability, hopefulness, continuing to walk the path in times where it feels like, you know, it's going to be a few centuries.
Well, I don't know if I have those words. I mean, I'm sure you've all had this experience as teachers, that something terrible happens in the world. Either a big thing that's on the front page, or else just something terrible happens in your own life. You know, even if it's just something as, you know, the dog, that, you know, your dog dies, or your child is sick, or something very personal, and yet and you don't have an answer. And yet you also know that then you're going to go and stand in front of a room full of students. And it's going to be up to you to provide hope for them that you may not always be able to find for yourself. It's one of the weird things about being a teacher, and there's a way in which, as we all know, there's a not a small element of theater involving being a teacher. And that was always the part that always scared me the most, because it wasn't that I didn't know things or that I didn't feel things, but I was so, before I came out as trans, I was so scared of being in front of people. And if there was a class that had an oral presentation part of it, I would just drop it, because there was no way I was going to stand in front of people and talk. So I don't have any kind of magical insight that you all don't have. But you find inspiration. Occasionally there are these great inspirational figures who will lift you up. But a lot of times it's the small interactions you have. An interaction that I'll never forget was when I came out to my mother as trans. And Mom was then 85, conservative, evangelical, Christian, Republican woman, of not just another generation, but of several generations back, and an immigrant to this country in the 20s, in fact, and born in the teens. So my coming out as transgender was not right on her radar. So I came out to her, and I started to cry, and I said, I'm sorry I didn't tell you this when I was 5, because I knew when I was 5, but I didn't have the words, and I was afraid that you wouldn't love me anymore. And so, wah, wah, wah. You can probably tell I'm an easy cry. My mother got up out of her chair and sat down next to me and wiped the tears off my face. And she said, I would never turn my back on my child. And then she quoted 1 Corinthians, the greatest of these is love. And I said, yeah, okay, but Mom, when people find out I'm your daughter now, isn't that going to be an embarrassment and a scandal? And she said, well, quite frankly, yes. And then she said, but I will adjust. She said, love will prevail. So in my life, mostly love has prevailed. But then I was largely lucky, which is odd to talk about my experience as lucky, because there were times when it was really, really, really horrible, and times I wasn't sure that I was going to make it, and times when I considered the alternative to being here, to put it vaguely. And yet, love did prevail in my life. For many transgender people, something other than love prevails. For many people who bring that thing out of their heart, what they meet instead is rejection and violence and homelessness and murder. And sometimes the love that you, sometimes the reaction that you get is also the result of some of the baked-in privilege that society delivers you. So transgender women of color there's an epidemic, as you probably know, of trans women of color being murdered in this country right now. It's not generally middle-aged white ladies with an endowed chair at Barnard who are facing violence and homelessness. But, is my life more valuable than theirs? No, of course not. So what we need to do is make sure that everyone's allowed to live the life that they love, and that living your life shouldn't be a matter of luck. It shouldn't be a matter of where you were born or where you went to college or if you went to college. It should be, well, equal protection under the law for everyone. And unfortunately, right now, the hope of equal protection is more threatened than ever, as we all know. And some of the GLAAD, which I'm just about to term off the GLAAD board after 7 years, GLAAD did a study this winter, which some of you may have seen, that shows that for the first time in the measure, since the poll is being taken, for the first time in the last year, support for LGBTQ Americans acceptance is going down. Every year it's been a little bit forward, and this year it's back down to, essentially to where it was in 2008, which is an interesting year to pick. So, so what do we do in response to this heartlessness? I think it's okay to cry. I think it's okay not to have the answers and not to always be ready for the fight. But so we take care of ourselves first. And that can involve a pizza and a nice blankie and Netflix or whatever you use. But then, if we can, find the courage to get out there and march and change the world. And sometimes you change the world simply by doing your job, simply by standing in front of students and telling your students the thing that you want to be true for yourself. Sometimes and I know my mother suffered. It wasn't that easy. She said all the right things, but then she had a hard time. But she said love will prevail. And eventually it did. And when she died at the age of 95, 10 years later, she had been my greatest fan and my greatest supporter. And if we can flip my mother, we can flip anybody. Oh, there's another question. Hi. I was building up I thought that was the big finish, actually. I'll tell you, I know people have to go. We'll make this the last one, okay? Hi.
Just real quickly, I work in a 3 to 6 year old environment with Montessorians, okay? In the past, I've had boys come dressed as girls to school, and I want to know and I get questions then from the other parents and from the students, what would be a good way to open up that dialogue? Or is it something that obviously,
well, yeah. So again, there are probably people in this room who are better at answering that question than I am, since my specialty is not the pedagogy of primary school teaching. But as a humanist, I would say, well, Billy likes to wear dresses, and we don't see any reason not to support her, and we're going to follow Billy where she wants to go. It doesn't mean if you have a 6-year-old male-bodied person who says that they want to be a girl. I can tell you, as someone who had this, I didn't know what being a girl really meant when I was 6. So wanting to wear dresses doesn't necessarily mean you want to be a girl. In fact, most of the people that I know that wear dresses are not women, actually. You know what I mean? How many women in this room are wearing dresses right now? Maybe a couple, but most of us, really, it's February. Come on. But on the other hand, I'm sure they have heat in the school where you're at. So if it's warm, wearing a dress can be fun. It's fun. So and we just don't know. It doesn't mean that this child immediately needs hormones and and the whole thing. It may mean that. But I try to meet. My students are much older, but I've had my children were young once. I try to meet young people where they are. And my job is really not the care and tending of their souls. My job is to teach them the difference between lie and lay. Although, actually, this whole thing might be easier than that. But people you can't learn if you don't feel safe. So if people ask, I don't really understand this, you don't need to know all the answers. You say, well, Billy wants to wear a dress, and we don't see why not. Is there something you'd like to wear? That's the best I got. Okay, thank you, everybody.